David Miliband, welcome to Free. Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, for coming here. It was very interesting to listen to you at the conference, but maybe I'd like to focus a little bit more on humanitarian aspect of war in Ukraine, in Europe, but beyond Europe, and including when it comes to displacement of people. But does it have an impact outside Europe on the humanitarian aspect?
Well, I think that it does, but in a way indirectly. Three things occur to me. First of all, it shows that if you want to treat refugees properly, you can. If you want to fund humanitarian efforts properly, you can. Secondly, I'm very concerned that there will be a great sucking of resources away from extremely poor populations in East Africa and elsewhere at the expense of them and in favor of the Ukrainian effort. And there's an element of Hobson's choice about this, or even Sophie's choice about it, that but I do fear there is that sucking of resources, quite a short-term issue. And then the third indirect consequence that I also fear is that because Ukraine is sucking in so much bandwidth, political bandwidth, diplomatic bandwidth, because it's so structuring of, we had a conversation just now about the G20. The only issue in advance is not what is the agenda, it's how is it going to be handled with the different players, President Putin attending, question mark. You could be forgiven for forgetting that we're living through a pandemic still, where less than 20% of low-income countries are vaccinated. So the indirect danger is that the political bandwidth for doing anything is also reduced on the wider humanitarian crisis. That is growing. 800 million people, according to the World Food Programme, are going to bed hungry tonight.
That was my second question, actually. Do you think, humanitarian agency can be within the UN, like UNHCR or NGOs like yours, have received a lot of money, a lot of funds from governments and from private donors as well, as never happened before. So my second question was, and you answer it, is it at the expense of a crisis? And maybe it's a tricky question. Why do you think it's like that?
Yeah, but I mean,
when it comes
just first of all, if you go onto the IRC website, you won't support Ukraine at the expense of other crises, because we raise money for Ukraine, Yemen, Somalia for our crisis response. And of course, some people specify only for Ukraine. But actually, we found Ukraine-inspired support for a range of crisis interventions to be quite strong. And we didn't hide. We didn't just have in a tiny little footnote an asterisk on the appeal that says in small letters this may go elsewhere. We explained that Ukraine is a humanitarian crisis, but so are there others, and we'll use our judgment about where to support. So I don't think it has to be at the expense, and certainly in our own case, we've augmented our funding for wider crises, not just for the Ukraine crisis. What is true is that the Ukraine crisis is very well funded, relatively speaking, compared to the other crises. Why is that? Well, it's pretty obvious, really, which is that proximity and shock. This is the first war on Europe's soils, and really, you can say the Balkans in the 1990s, but it's an unusually flagrant reminder of Europeans of their history. But it has also reached into American communities, not just Ukrainian Americans either. I mean, there is a significant Ukrainian American community, and obviously that raises the question of double standards that Thomas Gomar raised. Certainly, the allegation or the fear is that there would be double standards. But I've tried to use, and IRC has tried to make the case that to punish people in East Africa or in Afghanistan twice over, one for their own situation and then for the situation in Ukraine, would be quite wrong. So we've just got to make the argument. IRC is growing. And what the last few years have shown is that money is not actually the issue.
No, most of the time it's not. Last question on refugees and refugees in Europe. And well, I mean, Europe is facing the largest displacement situation since 1945, and one of the largest in the world. And that's only my opinion, but I do believe that Europe is entering the 21st century of refugees.
Yes, good way of putting it.
Because we are facing here a situation that other parts of the world have been facing more and more over the last decade. And at the same time, it happened at the time when there's a lot of tension between member states of the EU and among and within member states. I mean, there's strong debates in many countries, in France, in Britain, in Italy, on immigration and refugees. Do you think this situation is going to change the way Europe and Europeans understand the global immigration and refugee challenges, which are global, and at the end and subsequently the policies?
Well, that is an interesting question. I mean, you and I know that 85% or 80% of the world's refugees are not in rich countries, they're in poor countries. They're in Bangladesh, Uganda, Jordan, Lebanon, etc. Europeans may come to understand that, or they may think, as a result of the Ukraine crisis, that most refugees are in Europe, which they're evidently not. Now, I always say to people, look, 4, 5, 6 million refugees is a lot of people, but Europe is a continent of 500 million people. So let's keep this in perspective. And I think that the absence of a refugee and migration agreement across Europe really is wrong. I mean, the Biden administration, point one, they now have their 125,000 refugee resettlement target. I mean, Europe should be having its 40 or 50,000 target. For France, that means 6, 7, 8,000 people. No one's going to persuade me that 6,000 people coming on a legal route that's properly vetted and organised by the UN is going to France will sink under that. Secondly, Europe has got experience of successful integration and unsuccessful integration. I'm not trying to be to rub the point in because I'm in Paris, but the latest statistics that on Syrians in Germany, the latest statistics on Afghans in America, which we published last week, the IRC, shows these people become net contributors and net taxpayers pretty quickly. So that's an important part of this argument. Thirdly, Europe, in contrast to 2015-16, now has an effective border management system, but one where there are very well-founded reports of refugees being pushed back at borders. Not processed at borders, but just pushed back. And that is going to be used by Europe's enemies politically, internationally. And so I think there's a very strong case for Europe to live up to its values at its own borders, process cases, save people's lives if they're in the sea, process their cases. We've got to hold on to that.